something. Sam, have you ever started a job and then on your first day, like put your foot in your mouth in a way you didn't understand or expect?
Can't say that I have, unfortunately.
Yeah. So before we get into this, I'm going to tell you a story. So Owen, our intern, started last week. Great kid. A good kid. I don't know if he's great yet. I mean, right now he's in good status. One of the first things he brought up, he's like, man, Florida State's overrated. They're garbage. Not knowing that the guy who just hired him and brought him in to be an intern was an alum of that institution. So I'm gonna keep him in the hard time zone until Florida State takes an L this year, which I hope doesn't happen. But who am I kidding? All right, Sam. So last week was kind of a mess for Baylor in a lot of different ways. How much of that mess is reparable in a week?
Thanks for having me on. And reparable in a week is an interesting timetable for it. I think you will see a much better executing Baylor. The first 4 drives that the team put together last week, and remember, Aranda said in the post game that they were having trouble keying a lot of their blocking schemes off how Texas State was lining up. There were a few things that kind of surprised them. And I think over the first 4 drives, they had around like 55 yards total, or 54 yards total. From then on, they averaged 55 yards a drive. So clearly the offense found something to move the ball after that. So I do think you'll see a lot better performance out of them. And that's even with the blocking looking extremely sloppy. That's even with the protection issues they had. That's even with them competing with the Fiesta Bowl for how many times can you hurt yourself with false start. It's offensively, I expect them to be better. And you're talking about Grimes and Mateos, who came in and took the very struggling 2020 offensive line and in one offseason got them competent in the wide zone to the point that running game was able to lead their way to the Big 12 title. I'm not expecting that, but I expect them to get them competent at the very least. Now, defensively is a little bit of a different story because you saw guys like Gabe Hall and TJ Franklin who have been dudes in the defensive line and have been able to hold up against some of the better offensive linemen in the Big 12, just playing way too high, getting pushed back. And you also saw the fact that you lost your top 3 nose tackles from last year and your top anchoring, heavy against the run, 2-gapping D tackle was out injured. The replacements inside had a really rough night. And to be fair, that's a decent offensive line. You're basically taking 3 starters plus the most promising pro upside guy from a FCS team that was a play away from playing for it all last year with the best offense in the FCS. And the other guy was an Oklahoma transfer. So you weren't exactly against the scout team, but you have to be better. I'm expecting them to be a little bit better up front. Just pad level alone and technique alone and getting Boykins back will help that. And it'll hopefully help them limit how often those safeties are in obvious one-on-one coverage.
So they're playing the one team that you don't want to, have that get right game come against because Utah is going to be very fundamentally sound, but they also do have a week of film on the quarterbacks. I don't think Cam Rising is going to play in this game. It doesn't appear that that's the case unless everything we've heard is a lie. But how do you see them attacking Utah and stopping Utah from attacking them?
Well, on each side of the ball, Utah's got really good coordinators, and they've had them for a while. They've got continuity in the program from the head coach all the way down through the staff, and it really shows in their recruiting and player development. Like Phil Bennett came on and talked to you guys. They've got a bunch of guys where you're like, where on earth did they get this kid? But they're good. On the defensive side, you're going to see somewhat of a similar tactic style that you saw last week against Texas State. So Baylor at least has some film on what to go fix because you're going to see a fair amount of man coverage. You're going to see a lot of blitzing. You're going to see a lot of smaller, fast guys that want to live in your backfield. This isn't as much of a read and react defense as it is an attacking one. So I think there's the potential for Baylor to show a lot of what it's learned over the last week there for a more directly applicable matchup schematically. They've got to keep Sawyer clean, and they've got to find a way to just get those guys blocked. I think Dominic Richardson showed the ability to get downhill and fall forward if you give him just the bare minimum amount of blocking you need. So I do think if they can just get to a basic level of proficiency, they can potentially extend some drives and make it a little more difficult on the Utes. And then on the other side of the ball, Utah has a really, really good offensive coordinator who was at Vanderbilt when Baylor had that shootout with them in Houston in the bowl game. And what he's really good at is designing plays that stress the defense, but it stresses your assignments. It creates space for his guys. It makes everything look the same. But it's not we're going to stretch you from sideline to sideline at tempo that they faced last week. This is not an offense, and particularly without Rising in there, this is not an offense that wants to sit there and throw slot fades at you. This is an offense that wants to run the ball, do play action, have the wide receiver fly sweep, control the back side pursuit on you. And they want to hit play action. They want to use controlled West Coast passing concepts. And it's a style of offense that is less matchup dependent, but it puts their guys in favorable spots. So, for instance, like if they were to face somebody like an Alabama or a Georgia, it would probably scale better than what you saw happen to Tennessee when they ran into Alabama, for instance, or Georgia, I should say, where the talent on the individual matchups was much more of a focus than it would be with, say, Utah, for instance.
So, what do you expect Baylor to attack them with a backup quarterback in? Do you think it'll be much different than if Sic'Em was playing?
I think systematically Baylor's going to be keeping the nuts and bolts of what they're doing pretty similar. But I do think Sawyer opens up things with the quarterback run game in a way that Sic'Em doesn't. He's a little bigger, a little faster. He gives you the ability to do that. And in 2021, the last time anyone running the reliable, violent offense faced Utah and Morgan Scalley's defense, Utah really struggled both with the quarterback read option, where Jaron Hall, who frankly is a lot faster than Sawyer, was able to make some really backbreaking plays on that. But they also had a little quarterback draw RPO series where it was either quarterback draw or he could swing past the running back. That hurt them for a good stretch in the second half as well. So I expect that to be a part of the game plan. But really with Baylor, it's going to be a lot more about what are you doing to handle your end of the business, because you have to get on your blocks. You have to get off of blocks. You have to make sure that your assignment's sound. No penalties, things like that, because this Utah offense is an absolute machine when they're fully healthy. But you have two difference makers in Cam Rising and Brant Keithy, who runs like a really quick slot receiver, but he's 230, 240 pounds and can block for you at tight end. Those two being out changed the game for them. I mean, after the initial opening bomb that they hit Florida with, that Florida completely misplayed, they averaged under 20 yards a drive against Florida. This is an offense that's usually in the 44 yards per drive range over the last 2-3 years. So they're definitely not to the level of offensive efficiency they usually are. And I think if Baylor can get a lead on them and make Barnes throw, they may not be as resilient as they would be. And they may not be as resilient for a comeback the way that a lot of the wide open offenses Baylor faces in the Big 12 might be.
Sam, do you think that the heat will affect Utah the way that fans are hoping it will?
I think it's an advantage, the fact that you deal with it every day and they don't. But much like somebody going to elevation and playing, or any number of other weather-related considerations, you have to play well enough for it to be something on the margins that's going to make that much of a difference. For instance, on offense, you have to extend drives. You have to stay on the field so they actually have to play, because nobody's going to get tired if they only have to play 45 to 50 snaps on defense just because it's a few degrees hotter. But if you're out there for 80 snaps, all of a sudden it makes a world of difference. And in particular, if they're able to make you run all over the place, play after play, it really adds up on you at that point. You know, the Baylor team, the level of offensive line execution that you saw early in the game against Texas State, if that happens, heat won't matter at all. But if Baylor can put together long drives and really lean on that defensive line, it will absolutely begin to start mattering because, Utah's without a couple of key defensive linemen. One of their D tackle starters and one of their D end starters, maybe even two, might be out. And when that rotation is a little thinner, that heat can potentially pile up on you.
How long will, say they struggle for the first month. Do you think that Baylor would you say that Baylor, because right now it might be too early to say they've got a talent deficiency, but do you worry that they might?
I go back and forth, and it depends on the position. With the defensive guys, you saw those D linemen that are returning at defensive end for them. You've seen them play much, much better than they did last week. So I don't necessarily think all of it on defense is a talent thing. It could just be you haven't been hitting enough in fall practice and you got caught flat-footed and guys were sloppy, or it could be a sign of talent issues. That's going to be something that's not necessarily the number of games, but rather, are you seeing a consistent trend? And are you seeing it on film where guys are actually taking the right steps? This isn't, a linebacker's head spinning rather than his actual talent level that he'll eventually reach. Is it something where he's hesitant and playing slow, or is he just slow? Is it something where the defensive line is playing with poor pad level, or do they literally just not have the ability to anchor? We'll see that over time. And I think this team is a lot better than they showed last week. And, you're never as good as you think you are when you win big, and you're never as bad as you think you are when you have a disappointment like that. But they have to play much, much better. The fan base is understandably very mad. The last two games they went out there after they had a disappointing end to the regular season last year. They went to the coldest bowl game of all time and saw an uninspired performance. And then they came back and everybody sat in the hot heat and sweat sitting in the stadium, watching them play uninspired ball against the Texas State program that nobody envisioned them losing to.
Yeah. When you put it like that, Sam, the swing in weather, but the swing in attitude hadn't changed. That's a little bit, that is a little bit troubling looking forward.
Right. Because, if you go back after the Texas Tech game last year, Baylor had a realistic chance, had they won the right combination of games, of going to the Big 12 title. Mm-hmm. Literally everybody in their way was on their schedule. TCU, K-State, Texas. All three of them. And then they come out uninspired against K-State. They let TCU come back on them, and then they let Texas come back on them. And then they have the last two games. So people are understandably frustrated, and a win over Utah would do wonders just for the state of the program, the state of the fan base. It would be a sign that they can get it back on track, because right now the fan base is understandably not very happy.
Sam Bradshaw, Sic'Em365.com. Sam, thanks so much. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks.
There you go, Sam Bradshaw. And Jack, you